Welcome to my week 3 update for my Italian project. It's been a bit of a breakthrough week for me this week, and I'm really excited to tell you about one lesson that I've learned, which I think is going to have huge consequences for the rest of the project and my language learning in general. So I'll tell you about that in this video. I'm also going to tell you about one strategic change that I've made that took me a little bit by surprise. And lastly, my feelings about my upcoming first conversation in Italian, coming very soon, which of course I'm going to be recording for your viewing pleasure. We're in a pretty cool location here in central London. I wonder if you can guess exactly where it is. You have behind me pretty much all of the major sites, I guess, of London. You've got, you've got the Shard, you've got Tower Bridge in the background, you can see it just there. The Shard, the tallest building in Europe, by the way, thanks to the Qataris with their investment. And you can see behind me the London Eye, and of course, some sewage works just down there. Now, you may remember a few weeks ago, I recorded a conversation with Gabe Weiner about whether you can learn Italian through opera. And you may have noticed that actually during this project, I haven't talked about that at all. And that's because, to be honest, I haven't used opera, I haven't done any learning with opera. And I was thinking about why that is, because after all, that was one of my big kind of motivators. And I think the reason is that, in the first couple of weeks, as I was looking for kind of really direct, relevant content in Italian to study with, opera didn't really fit into that category. I much preferred stories, dialogues, conversations, podcasts, and things like that. But this week I decided, right, I want to, I've been doing a lot of just, like I said last week, an avalanche of content in Italian. I want to try to reconnect with my, my passion for the language, my interest for learning Italian. And so I went to see La Bohème at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, and it was an absolutely stunning production. And I kind of sat there and got 2.5 hours of glorious input in Italian. It was one of the best productions I've seen. If you are in London, get yourself down there because it is well worth it. And so this week I felt this reconnection with my kind of core motivations for learning Italian, but it wasn't just in opera. You see, what I also noticed this week is that the things I've been listening to have really narrowed down into just one or two things. Besides the opera, I've been listening to these podcasts that I found on blogging, on online business, which I'm very, very interested in. And I've been listening to these pretty much non-stop. And the really cool thing is, not only can I understand them now, even though they are authentic content, but I'm listening to them primarily for the content, because I'm interested in what they have to say. I'm interested in the podcasts themselves. Aside from that, the other thing I've been doing is listening to this wonderful, actually reading this wonderful blog called Efficacemente, which is the efficient mind, and it's all about productivity, personal development, again, a topic that I'm really, really, really interested in. And every day I've been reading articles on this blog, again, not for the language, but out of genuine interest in the subject matter. And so, whereas in the last couple of weeks I've been, just trying to find stuff and exposing myself to the language, this week I feel I've really reconnected with, I found this kind of intersection between the language I want to study and then content that I really care about and I'm deeply interested in, compelling content. I found that intersection, and it's wonderful because now I can see the point at which I'm going to replace, whereas normally I'd listen to stuff in English, podcasts, I'd read stuff in English. Now I can actually switch that out and do those activities in Italian instead, which is just incredibly powerful, and it's something that can continue into the long term. And so the other really cool thing about reading the same blogs, listening to the same podcasts, is that it has a really beneficial effect on your languages. When you listen to the same voices, the same narrators, the same writers over and over again on similar topics, you notice that they start to repeat the same vocabulary. Everyone tends to have their favorite words and phrases that they use over and over again. And so I found that my vocabulary and the kind of phraseology that I'm used to in Italian has been getting a lot stronger thanks to this focus on a particular kind of content. And often, a question that's come up a lot in the past is, well, how can you actually learn vocabulary if you're not actively studying it with flashcards or whatever? Because I've been doing none of that. I'm still just listening and reading. That's all I'm doing. But of course the answer is, this is something that I covered in depth in my Bulletproof Memory course. In Module 3 of Bulletproof Memory, I call it the natural approach. And it's what happens, it's how to learn vocabulary when you're just exposing yourself to content, when you're immersed in content. Because one of the byproducts of that is the same vocabulary comes up over and over again, and if you're genuinely interested in what you are listening and reading to, you're going to learn that stuff because you are driven to understand the subject matter itself. It is the most powerful way of all. So I've really been noticing that my Italian has taken a big step up in the last couple of weeks, and things that were foreign to me before are now starting to seem natural. It's a very gradual process, but it's extremely gratifying. Right, so a strategic change that's been going on. This has taken me a bit by surprise actually, and it's been a result of this daily study and doing the work every day, 2 or 3 hours a day, and just noticing how my learning has been changing from day to day, from week to week. And most of that time has been spent listening. And what I've noticed is that, on the one hand, my comprehension has been going through the roof. From all that listening, I'm just so much more comfortable with the sounds of Italian, my vocabulary has been increasing. Great. However, I've been feeling a lack of detail in my comprehension. Well, not my comprehension, but just a general lack of detail in the language. Like, what's the verb ending? What's the preposition? Like, what's the phraseology that's being used here? And I think that comes as a consequence of listening for gist, listening to keywords in order to inform your comprehension. But of course, when you're listening, you don't need to necessarily understand every detail. If you understand the root of a verb, for example, that's often enough to get the main point. You don't need to necessarily know what the verb ending is. And little snippets of information that are enough to understand. But I'm sensing that if I actually came to speak at this point, I would have quite a serious lack of detail in being able to actually speak Italian myself and get it right in all these details of the grammar in particular. And so what I've actually been doing is not listening as much and instead reading. There's something about reading that is certainly for me at this stage anyway, is a much greater challenge. I was going to talk about this last week, but I was just at the beginning of starting to think about it, so I didn't. But what I've noticed is when you read, you really have to, it's a higher cognitive load, right? Which is to say it's harder. You have to take in more information. You can't rely so much on the help from the audio, words you might recognize. And so with the reading, what's happened is my arm's getting tired. So by reading more and more, what I found is I'm able to focus much more on the detail because it's just harder in general. I'm noticing things like these verb endings and these prepositions that I wasn't paying so much attention to when I was listening. So what I'm trying to do is balance out the time I'm spending listening with the time that's just reading without any audio. Because when the audio is on, like even if you're listening and reading at the same time, it's like a get out of jail free card in a way. You can just rely a little bit too much. So it's interesting to observe that I'm gravitating more towards reading only at this stage. I think it might just be a question of like the pendulum balancing itself out, and I'm sure over time I'll go back to doing more of both. But right now, at least the first hour of every day in the morning, I am simply reading. I'm taking this Efficacemente blog that I really, really love. And again, another thing is blogs are so good for reading because they tend to be written quite colloquially. Just like the way I write my blog posts, it's not formal, it's colloquial. And that means that you're getting exposure to a kind of language that is useful and practical. And so, coming up in about a week or so, 10 days or so, is my first conversation in Italian. I'm going to be recording it. The main way that I'm feeling about that right now is that I'm not going to be able to speak with all that much accuracy. I think I'll be able to understand quite a lot of the conversation, but not speak that well, which is partly behind, I think, why I'm shifting towards this more reading-based approach in order to try and focus my mind just a little bit more on accuracy so that my speaking is, so I can actually start to speak as well as understand, which, let's face it, is the whole point, right? So a lot going on. I think if I was going to draw one thing out of this for you, I would say that really I can't overstate the power of finding content that you're deeply interested in and that's also comprehensible. It's really blown me away. It's the comprehensible input plus compelling input. Nothing new. It's been around for decades, but here I am finding it out for myself. All right, that's it for now. See you back next week for my week 4 update.